going to be in Romans 9, Romans 3. Sorry, you guys did not miss anything. Romans 3 verses 9 through 20. Thought about titling this series Romans for Everyone, but a better title would likely be Romans Forever, because the only way to take Romans is a few verses at a time. So, yep. So we're gonna be 3 weeks in chapter 3 as well. But it's good because in order to fully understand this, we have to take fewer verses because there's a lot packed into these verses. So a little bit about that in the review. First, why was Paul writing to the Romans? Go ahead, Shada.
If I remember correctly, it's because they actually had no, I want to say official, but no one from directly to teach them. They had brought back the teachings themselves, but they needed extra foundational work.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. This church was most likely founded by Jews who were there at the day of Pentecost, when Peter and the other disciples were speaking in tongues and evangelizing. They converted to Christianity and then took the faith back to Rome. But they never really had someone lay out kind of the gospel 101, if you will. And that's what Paul is doing. He's doing that to kind of put together the gospel. Wow, I'm going to speak tonight. In a kind of lay it out in a logical format. And he's kind of making an introduction because we know that he wants to do missions work in Spain, and Rome would be a perfect jumping off slash point base of operations for him to do so. Yeah. All right. If you had to summarize the book of Romans in a sentence or two, how would you? How would you summarize the message of the book of Romans so far? Go ahead, Shada.
Good news, but first we're going to spend 10 chapters of bad news.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Bad news, period. We haven't gone to the good news yet.
Go ahead, Wash.
The hidden good news.
You guys all trick answered me. Well done. No, yeah, it is the gospel 101. It's the bad news. Hey, I got some bad news and I got some good news. Right? Bad news but good news, or however you want to say it. Yeah. Bad news, then good news. The hidden good news. Yeah, exactly. One of the commentators I was reading today summarized it as the diamond on the black velvet backdrop. Kind of interesting. The idea of like one point of light surrounded by blackness. Yeah, and then like we talked about, Paul has kind of talked about the bad news so far. What has been the bad news so far? Go ahead, Doctor.
This little known problem in the world called sin.
Yeah, whose problem is it? Go ahead, Dodge.
Ours.
Yes. Exactly. It's our problem. And not our as the collective, but our as the individual, right? It's everyone's problem. Jew and Gentile. The people who are being read to and our own. Yep. All right. But we're going to do some more bad news this week. But we're talking about some of the ramifications of the bad news this week, and then Winged is going to take next week. He called it like 3 weeks ago. He actually has a pretty cool spin on it, so I'm kind of excited for next week. And then we'll get into some of the good news next week. All right. So, can I have a volunteer to read all the verses tonight, verses 9 through 20? We'll read it in one chunk, and then we'll take it apart one by one. By Dutch.
Alright. What then? Are we Jews any better off? No, not at all, for we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greek, are under sin. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside, together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave, they use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness, their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped, and the whole world may be held accountable to God. For by works of the law, no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin.
Thank you. All right, so the reason why, if you look at the link, a lot of this is kind of bracketed off to the right, is that Paul is quoting from the Old Testament here. I was quoting from a couple different places. Most of this comes from various Psalms, but there are a few pieces of this that come from the book of Isaiah, specifically in prophecies about the coming Messiah. So we know that Paul was originally a Pharisee, so he knows the Old Testament well, and he is piecing together verses to kind of make his case here. Yep, exactly. Kind of various Psalms with some Isaiah. Um, so we'll kind of take it piece by piece here. Verse 9 says, "What then? Are we Jews any better of it? No, not at all. For we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greek, are under sin." It's basically saying, "What then?" or "What now?" Um, and what he's saying, "What now?" is okay. Well, we're all under sin. We're all equally condemned here. I've been throwing around that phrase "under sin" quite a bit. So has Winged. What does it mean to be under sin? Go ahead, Dodge.
Is this kind of in the context of a slave to sin?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it has the idea. It's a the phrase in Greek actually has kind of a legal um, uh, connotation to it. So, like a Roman citizen is under Roman law. A a Persian citizen is under Persian law. Well, we're under sin. We're under sin's authority, almost as if we are citizens of the nation of sin. So, regardless of if some of us sin more than others, we're all under the citizens, of the nation sin. So we're all condemned. We're all at war with God. Yeah, the kingdom of darkness. Exactly. Yep. And regardless of how much we know about the right thing to do, we're all still under sin, under this condemnation, under this nation of sin, if you will. So verse 10, as it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. So, like we said earlier, kind of summing up what I said earlier about both Jews and Gentiles being under sin, being condemned, being in rebellion against God. He says, "No one understands, no one seeks for God." That's kind of interesting. Um, you guys may have heard the term seeker-sensitive churches. At least you may have if you grew up in the '90s, like I did. It was a big church movement in the '90s to be seeker-sensitive. But we still talk about um, certain people are seekers. Oh, they're seeking God. They're really seeking after God, or they're a seeker, somebody who is interested in Christianity but not quite a Christian yet. What? But so we throw that term around, and yet here it says no one seeks after God. So how do we reconcile this? Do people seek after God? Are there such thing as seekers, if you will? Go ahead, Shada.
I would say yes, but it's not because of them. We don't seek righteousness, but we can be spurred by God to seek after Him.
Okay. Now that's a very Lewis-esque answer, which I can appreciate. Those of you know who, if you know C.S. Lewis's background, he was an atheist who was, by his own admission, dragged kicking and screaming into the kingdom of God. He was not seeking after God, and yet he says that God sought him out and dragged him into the kingdom as a POW. Is the illustration he uses in his memoir. Yeah, exactly, Kessa. Yeah, also dragged by Tolkien. But what about the people who don't become Christian, who do go and study Christianity and study Islam and study Hinduism, but they're not. So they're looking for something, looking for meaning. Perhaps are those people seekers? Go ahead, Dodge.
Knowing about someone is different from knowing them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I'm asking, are those people seekers? The people who are like looking for meaning in different religions? Go ahead, Kessa.
Seekers of what?
Sorry, Kessa, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought I was talking. My mic was off. So I would answer the question with the question: the seekers of what?
Interesting. Go ahead, Doctor.
I don't think. My opinion is that you can no more find God, be trying to seek God in another religion than you can be seeking God in any other distraction. You think that you found something where there is nothing.
Good, Kessa.
I guess I would ask: are they seeking God, or are they seeking to assuage guilt or escape guilt, or, like Doctor said, distract themselves from questions closer to home?
Well done, guys. You guys have all given either the answers that C.S. Lewis gave or the answer that Thomas Aquinas gave. So you guys are in good company. Thomas Aquinas was arguably one of the best Christian philosophers that ever lived, and was asked this question during his lifetime. Thomas Aquinas was well known about thinking about difficult questions and um, making a life of trying to answer them. And this, what he said, was there's a difference between seeking God and seeking the benefits of God. Purpose, peace, happiness, um, forgiveness of guilt or shedding of guilt. Those are all benefits of God, and we all want that. But who here who's human wants to submit to a holy, all powerful God who can tell us what to do? Nobody wants that. That's the whole point of the why we walked away from God in the Garden of Eden, right? We wanted to be our own gods. So we all want to feel guilty. We all want to have purpose. We all want to have peace. We all want to have happiness. We all want to have the perks of knowing God. But apart from God acting on us and His Holy Spirit working on us, we don't want. There's no one who wants to God for God's sake. God, to serve God. And I think that that is important for us to understand, not just from a theological, hypothetical point of view, like here, or from a human sinfulness point of view, but also from a point of view of when we talk about being seeker sensitive in the church. Like, we need to understand that we have to be honest with people and say, hey, yes, God has provide purpose and peace and happiness, but He's also Lord, not just Savior. And that's a more difficult thing for us to swallow. Well handled, though, guys. That's verse 11. I would also say there's another thing we can talk about from verse 11, and that's so each one of these things listed here is something that sin affects, and here it's clearly affecting our understanding, affecting our thoughts, and it's preventing us from understanding the full truth. Now, so what are some ways that sin blunts our understanding, blunts our thinking? Nice, Kessa. Hi, Kessa.
We lose any claim to true detachment, or true objectivity, I should say.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, because sin makes us the center of the universe. Go ahead, Dodge.
Yeah, I was gonna say it refocuses our thoughts onto ourselves and reframes things towards evil.
Yeah. No, you guys are right. And obviously, we're not the center of the universe, not even the center of the solar system. Like my flat earthers think. um, but the um, so that sort of perspective automatically makes us unable to think totally clearly about things. Yeah. Sin affects our understanding. We like to think that we can think totally objectively, and there is objective truth out there. Um, and it is our responsibility to seek after as best we can. But know that as sinful humans, we're always going to have a slant to our thinking. It's always going to be about us somehow. So, the follow-on question from this is: does this mean that those who don't know God cannot know truth? If sin blunts our understanding. Go ahead, Kessa.
Is the question, can they know all truth, or can they know some truth?
Question as stated is: does this mean that those who do not know God cannot know truth? Go ahead, Doctor.
That depends on the kind of truth. I would that there's definitely some form. There's probably some forms of truth, but no, I don't think that there's any objective type of truth that they would know.
Dodge and then winged.
Well, I'm coming at this from this is a trick question point of view, and I've known atheists who know that 1 + 1 is 2, which is true. So I think what I'm saying is I want more clarification on what your actual question is as well.
Okay, go ahead, winged, and then I'll clarify myself.
One more time. What's your question? Word for word. No. I'm doing this for purpose to check against myself, but I also want to hear if he says something in particular.
Okay, I will read it from my notes. No
Okay.
confusion. Does this mean that those who do not know God, comma, cannot know truth?
I wonder if we aren't focusing on the wrong word. Or on the wrong part of that. Yeah. I'm wondering if the focus shouldn't be on truth, but on the knowledge of God. Because truth, we view truth in a lot of different ways, but the real question I think we need to get to the heart of is the nature of truth. Whereas, like God said, 1 plus 1 is 2. We've established that that's a law of the universe based upon math, but it's not a truth that affects us in the grand scope of eternity. Truth here and the knowledge of God are inseparable. So I think we're talking about a truth that brings life.
Go ahead, Data, and then Dodge.
So I guess my question is, if they cannot know truth, how can they know God then? Because God is truth, and people have known God and come to saving grace. Also, I kind of think of the people who we don't know what's going on, but how this happens, but they do come to it. They know who God is, and they know that this is the right way, but they deliberately turn away from it. They know what the right thing is, but they deliberately turn.
Go ahead, Dodge.
This one was again kind of off of what Winged was saying. Where is our focus in this? Realizing that, oh, what exactly do you mean by know God is also important to this question. The question's vague.
Man, it's impossible to ask you guys trick questions now. I'll become so suspicious. No, it was
Like we
deliberately.
don't have a good reason to be suspicious. Come on, man.
It was deliberately vague. I gotta up my trick question game. I forgot I'm not playing with amateurs anymore. Yeah. No, that's you guys. You guys took it apart very well. There's multiple levels to this, right? Obviously, there is elements of objective truth, objective reality that people who don't know God can know. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Beyond that, there's elements of moral truth that people who don't know God can know. Paul has already talked about that in Romans 2. And I think there are some examples of that in history. There's some examples in um, elements of certain philosophies from the East. There's some elements of that in Socrates' philosophy. And we shouldn't be surprised when we see elements of truth in other religions and philosophies, right? Because if God has built the universe in a certain way, and we're all looking at, um, we should be able to work some things out, like Paul talks about. But whether they can understand what is truly valuable, so what's truly valuable is God. And if they don't know God, they don't know what's truly valuable. So they don't know the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality, if you will. But they can, because it's possible to know God. It's possible to know Him through His Word and through general revelation, as Romans 2 talks about. In other words, we can see that the world is built a certain way, and and can therefore come to knowledge of God from that. However, apart from God, it's not possible to know all of reality, and even as Christians, because we still have sinful tendencies. We also can't know all truth. That does not mean we can't know any truth, but it means we can't know, capital T, all of truth and every facet of it. Does that make sense? Did I muddy the waters too much? Yeah, exactly. Okay. Verse 12. So in addition to affecting our thoughts and understanding, sin also affects our actions. Verse 12 says, and all have turned aside, together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. So, does this mean that those who do not know God cannot do good deeds? Go ahead, Dodge.
What's a good deed?
Aw.
Good question. Yeah, no, that's what it comes down to, right? So, can someone sacrifice for someone else? And is sacrificing for someone else a good thing? Yes, sacrificing for someone else is a good, because Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." And we know that pagans have sacrificed for others. And we see that in Greco-Roman literature. We see it in literature all over the world. Sacrifice for the good of another loved one is almost universally held up as a good in other societies. But that's not the kind of good that Paul is talking about here, even though I left it vague in my question. What he's talking about here are deeds that change that under sin thing, right? Deeds that would bring us to salvation. Deeds that would bring us closer to God, or would reconcile us to God, restore that relationship with God. And those sorts of deeds are impossible. Because the good deeds we do never outweigh the sum total of the bad deeds. We can never, apart from God taking a punishment upon us and and offering forgiveness through faith, we can't unrebel from God, right? We've already turned away. We've already walked away. We've already said, "I want to be my own God." So that rebellion, the cost of rebellion, the cost of treason, is death. Anybody in the ancient world would know that. We can't, we can't take that cost. We can't undo that treason unless someone takes that penalty for us, and that's what God has come and done. So there's nothing that we can do in and of ourselves that will bring us close to God that will undo that treason. That's what he's talking about here. Go ahead, Wayne.
I'm just gonna divert that real quick. Hang on to what you just said. Just throw that one away. That one's gonna be real important next week. The idea of undoing the treason.
And that's the second trailer for next week already. Right.
Oh, I wasn't here for the first one. I'm sorry. I was away. I just got back. What was the first one?
Oh, we're just building it up. Just building up next week.
No, but what was the first one? Because I need to know if I've got it, if I've already looked at it, or if it's something I need to take a second look at.
I just said that the good news might be coming next week.
Oh,
Finally.
good news definitely coming next week. You better believe it.
Yep, exactly. All right. Verses 13 and 14. So far, sin, as we talk about how sin affects our legal standing before God, it affects our thoughts, it affects our actions. Verses 13 and 14, their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps under their lips. That 5 times fast. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Well, sin also affects our words. And there's a couple different analogies here. But what kind of speech is being talked about here, for the most part, from the analogies that are being given? What kind of speech is being talked about? Yeah, words that hurt others. What else? Go ahead, Dutch.
Slander, gossip, salt, all of those.
Yeah. Yep. Salt. Yeah, so their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The idea with that is um, as if there is a tombstone that has come loose, and you can smell the death and the putrid decay inside. That's what he's saying. Um, that these people's throats are like. So like really bad breath. No, but like you can tell from the way they talk, and the way they talk about others, the way they talk about God, that they are sinful out there, that they're far from God. Yeah, there's death inside of them. The fact that what they say, how they talk, reveals that what's inside of them is dead. This is if you were to walk by that tomb and be like, "Huh, I wonder what's in that cave." And you get within 10 feet, you're like, "Nope, I know what's in that cave. Nothing alive." So that's the idea here. The venom of asps is under their lips. This is my favorite one, not just because it's a tongue twister. Because it's as if behind their lips they have these fangs, right, with asp venom. Asp venom was considered one of the most painful ways to die in the ancient world. When you got bit by an asp, you didn't just die; you died painfully and agonizingly. So it's this idea that that behind people's that these words that they're speaking are designed to cut down others and to destroy them, and not in a straightforward sort of way, but in a bitten in the back, dies over time, their reputation dies, and they slowly just kind of you know shrivel up and decay within the group. So obviously gossip, obviously backbiting, those sorts of things, and this is one of those things where it's really easy to be guilty of it. I mean, I see this in my own life as much as I try to prevent it. I've seen it in my own life happen, and I think that it's certainly something we're guilty of in the American church quite a bit. Something that we tolerate far, far more than we should. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. So the idea that they're bitter, they're angry, curses being something, not necessarily swearing. I saw a couple of commentators say this talking about swearing. I disagree with that actually. I think that swearing isn't something we should make a habit of doing. But this is more talking about curses are something in the ancient world that's designed to bring misfortune, to bring ill will upon others. When you curse something, you're not just necessarily cussing about it in the ancient world, but you're actually invoking some sort of power to bring about a bad outcome to someone or something. So destructive talk. And that's something we certainly see in the world today, the nation at large, our offices, our schools, our workplaces, our families, our own lives. That's something that comes about because of sin. Their feet are swift to shed blood, and in their paths are ruin and misery. The way of peace they have not known. So, we've talked about how sin affects our legal standing, it affects our thoughts, it affects our speech, it affects our deeds, and here we see it affecting our relationships. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Their actions are tearing down others now. In their paths are ruin and misery. The idea that we're leaving a trail of destruction in our wake. Something that would be very um, an illustration that the ancient world would connect with. When you'd have these ancient armies did not have a supply train, believe it or not. You know how when we go to war nowadays, we send over tons of planes and ships and stuff to bring the soldiers food and ammo and weapons and care packages. They didn't do that back then. An army would come into an area, and what they would eat is what they'd take from the area. They'd literally roll through like a steamroller of destruction and loot and pillage and burn and enslave and take food from these villages and towns that they'd roll through. That's how the soldiers were paid. The soldiers were paid in the oxen and slaves that they looted from these places. So if you were to come into an area that had just had an army roll through it, you could actually see a literal path of destruction that has come through an area. A path of burnt buildings and abandoned towns and busted up barns or whatever they're using to store their grain, and all the grain's gone, all the livestock's gone, all the money's gone, all the people are gone. And what he's saying is that's what we do, right? That's how we torch and burn our way through life, taking what we need from what we encounter. That's what sin makes us do to our relationships. And that's something that I think we can all relate to. We've had that done to us. We've seen that done to others. And perhaps we've done that to others as well. But that is what sin makes us do in our relationships. And finally, there is no fear of God before their eyes. And part of that, this one seems kind of tame compared to the other ones. Like, no fear of God. Well, no kidding, right? I mean, coming on the heels of the venom of asps is under their lips, and in their paths are ruin and misery, the way of peace they have not known. This conquering idea that there's marauding army moving through. Well, of course, there's no fear of God before their eyes, but I think there's a reason why this is put last. And what do you guys think that is? Why do you think this one's put last after all that destruction and death in the illustrations before? Go ahead, Kessa.
Is it a kind of circling back to the beginning?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yep. It's a kind of summary of all of it, if you will, or an explanation to say this is what happens when man tries to make himself God. Because if there's no fear of God, that means that they are God, right? So this is what happens when man tries to usurp God or rebel against God. This is what it looks like. This is what he lives like. This is man apart from his creator, apart from his natural order. And just as these illustrations would be scarring for the ancient audience and would leave them with a terrible feeling, the things that they lived with, asps and invading armies and ruin and misery, open graves, these are things that they've seen. So I'm sure that some of them are having flashbacks to the times that they've seen this or experienced this, saying that this is what happens. That sort of chaos and destruction. That's what happens when man's apart from God. That's what happens when we are under sin. That's the result of the fall, the result of our rebellion. So he goes on to verse 19. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped, and the whole world may be held accountable to God. So, saying that whatever the law says applies to everyone. So the law, the fact that we know that this is terrible, that these things are bad, applies to everyone. That everyone may be held accountable to God. Verse 20, for by works of the law no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. So we can see through the law and through how things should be and how we're supposed to conduct our lives, how God wants us to conduct our lives, how bad things are, how far from how they should be, we have removed ourselves. And we can see the truth of how our mouths are like open graves. There's venom on our lips, how we have left this path of destruction in our wake. We can see that truth. But the law does not give us power to change it. The law is like a rear view mirror that allows us to look at it and go, wow, like there's that path of destruction I left. But it does not allow us to turn the steering wheel and go back and fix it. So, because of that, Paul's saying to the Jewish audience, the Jews have no right to be feeling any better about themselves than the Gentiles. Just because they can see the death and destruction they left in their wake and see that it's bad does not make them any better, because they've still left death and destruction in their wake, and they continue to leave death and destruction in their wake. So, that's the bad news. The law is not going to cut it. We're going to need something else. And that's what Paul and Winged are going to talk about next week. Any comments, questions, things you guys have to add or pull from this before we close out this week? Go ahead, Doc.
Goatman joined your channel.
That's a good question. So I have a theory. I did not. I'll give the theory, but I'll give this disclaimer first. Nothing I read said anything about this. However, what I know about ancient culture and what I've been reading in different Greek texts makes me kind of think that they're talking about the feet because this idea of pursuit. They're actually pursuing this destruction. Their feet are swift to shed blood, so they're going after the situation to shed blood. Yeah, running towards it. In ancient battles, most of the killing went on in the pursuit afterwards. Very little killing went on in the actual battle. But when one army turned and broke, another army would pursue after them and cut them down from the back. So this idea is that their feet are swift. That's when and there are certain armies that were talked about this, how they were slow and ponderous until after their side turned to run, and then all of a sudden they got really quick because they wanted to loot and they wanted to kill. And that's what this kind of rings of to me, and I could be just transposing a Greco-Roman view on that, but that is the audience that Paul is writing to, so I think that's how I would interpret this. Yeah. There's a couple orange lights, Wingeds and I think Kess's. You guys went blue again.
Hi guys.
There you go. Anything else? So things. I'm gonna pick a piece of this to meditate on this week. There's two recommendations I have. One is the verses 15 through 17. Their fear swift to shed blood, and their paths are ruin and misery, a way of peace they have not known. Just because it's so vibrant to me, this idea of kind of a destroying malevolent army coming through and just cutting down a whole area, and that's kind of what we do in our sin. What sin does to our relationships and drives us to do our relationships when we put ourselves above God. So that's one. But if you wanted to really summarize this whole thing, verse 18 is probably the best, most concise verse to meditate on. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Because then you can think about, what does the lack of a fear of God, what does having ourselves be God, what does that drive us to do? What has that driven people to do throughout history? In what areas have I not submitted myself to God? In what areas am I not fearing God? And do I need to fear God in? Go ahead, Winged. Go ahead, Winged. Okay. Wait a moment, static.
Sound like something was unplugging and plugging back in.
Amroth joined your channel.
Any better? There
we go.
There was a short in my cord, so I actually have to curl my cord, and if it comes uncurled enough, then it stops working. So it's weird. Anyways, I was gonna hijack your statement about verse to focus on, because I want you guys to take particular note of verse 10. All of this is pretty important, but verse 10 is the one that's gonna swing into next week with a little bit of force. That's all.
All right. Anybody else before we close out in prayer? Good wash.
I have a prayer request.
Go ahead.
I want to pray that my health insurance gets turned back on. I spoke with the CEO of the Air Force Academy, and to be vindictive, he shut off my health insurance for my whole family, and we're really hoping it gets turned back on soon.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, that's wow. Sorry.
We'll definitely be praying.
Jack's doing much better. His fever's broken. He's just, I don't know, he's just been kind of cranky. But we can't really take him to the doctor right now because our health insurance got shut off. We spent all day at the ER just so they could tell us that to give him Tylenol and he'll be fine.
and then charge you a bunch of money.
Probably. I haven't seen a bill yet, though. Which means it's going to be bad.
Got yours, Cappy? Anybody else? All right. Take this for the line.